Hello, everybody. It's good to see you again. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Harambe Talks. Today, we're going to talk about a newer story about captivity, the Natural Bridge Zoo. And joining us will be Jeff Kremer, who used to work at a zoo and can actually give us some inside info. And we wanted to take a look at the case and understand what we can learn about zoos in general versus what happened in this particular case. Is it one of the cases where this is a one-off, or is the problem business as usual, which tends to always be one of the bigger issues once we get into this? So let's see. So what we wanted to do today. So first of all, for everybody that has been following the story, we are waiting to hear the final outcome. But I wanted to just make sure that everybody's aware of what happened here. Recently, there was, let's bring this up here. So there's the Natural Bridge Zoo. There's the entrance. Now they had rescued the animal law office went in and actually raided it and removed a lot of animals. A lot of them were sick. A lot of them were deceased, and a lot of them were suffering. So the question is this the way the business is normally done, or is this an odd example, or is it a mix of the two? So let's take a look at captivity from an insider's perspective, and we're going to welcome back today our good friend, Mr. Jeff Kremer. Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Hey, Eric, good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you. Hey, there you are. Okay. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, it's great to be back with you and unite for the animals.
Yes. I see the conservation game poster back there. I wanted to ask if there was any upcoming events or anything that you guys had for the movie.
Yeah, I can't announce the specifics yet, but I have a screening at a college in Florida coming in April. Q&A, going to drive down for a Q&A afterwards, and very excited. It's going to be their ecology and some other environmental groups that are going to be attending in the theater at the college. So it's going to be a great engagement session. Plus, be my first time back to Florida in about 3 years, so I get to reunite with our friends.
Fantastic. I was going to ask, do you still have friends that are in the zoo industry down there, or has all that changed since the conservation game?
Yeah, great question. I don't have any friends in that particular zoo, well, at Tampa's Lowry Park Zoo, or Tampa Zoo, Zoo Tampa, as it's known today. I do have friends that continue to work in zoos across the country. In fact, a couple in particular. One has been a big cat carnivore keeper for over 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
One of the nation's largest AZA accredited zoos.
Great. Man, so that's that's so amazing. We were just to bring it sort of into the Natural Bridge Zoo. One of the issues there was Zeus, a white tiger that had been put down. But I think it's interesting because when they came in and started to do all this investigation, the story that the zoo gave did not add up to the facts that the investigators were finding. And when we come to the big cat, we come to Zeus. They say it was euthanized and it was a humane thing, but then to find out that he'd actually been suffering for quite a while before they had put him down. So what I wanted to ask about, well, I guess, first of all, let's start with the Natural Zoo. If you can just let our audience know sort of what happened with that and what the event was that occurred there.
Yeah, so I think, I was going over some notes last night trying to get my thoughts together and about the Natural Bridge Zoo situation. And I think I kind of started backtracking. Like, I really first wanted to say that, why we are here today talking about what we're talking about is, it's the core issue, which is the flawed concept of captive conservation, right? So whether it's the Natural Bridge Zoo situation or so many of these other situations we seem to be facing every single year, it's each, we can talk about each one. We'll talk about some of the particulars. But the reason we're here is because of that flawed concept, right? Captive conservation, that we can keep exotic animals in captivity under the guise of, I say faux conservation in many cases, or for labs, or for entertainment, or for ego. The common denominators are the problem is we're trying to keep exotic animals in captivity instead of dedicating the true resources in the wild in the native lands of these exotic species to try to keep them in the wild where they belong. With the Natural Bridge Zoo, and I have to first, the disclaimer is I have not participated in the investigation whatsoever. I know what the general public knows. I keep up with all the published articles. The court case ended last Wednesday, and then both parties, the defense and the prosecution, had until end of day Friday to submit their final statements to the judge. Now it's in the judge's hands, and I've not read a timeline. I would assume it'd be fairly quick, but that the judge is going to make a decision where the status is that the government is going to keep these animals ownership and probably disperse them to accredited sanctuaries or reputable organizations, or the flip side, if the Natural Bridge Zoo wins the case and gets their animals back. Most of the time it seems to be that the private owners don't win in these cases, but I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. I just we all want just what's best for the animals. Some of the ideas that came to my mind were it's just, again, it's one of those he said, she said, right? So the Natural Bridge Zoo people, the owners and the volunteers all immediately came out and said, nothing's wrong. All these are just false claims. And anytime anybody says nothing's wrong or everything's right, for me, that's a red flag. I mean, that's like saying I'm perfect or you're perfect, right? Well, that's just like, it's inconceivable, right? It's not possible. So the truth is probably somewhere in between. And, with regard to the Natural Bridge Zoo case, or if we look at some of the examples after the debacle of Tiger King came out, all the roadside zoos that have gone through the process of a lot of times confiscation and closure after that. And they've all gone through a pretty similar process, right? All these cases usually start with a concern, and then the concern leads to a complaint, and then the complaint leads to an investigation. And then the investigation oftentimes leads to, in this case, a court case, right? So in our country, that's our democratic judicial process. And we have, whether you agree with it or not, we have to respect it on both sides. So I'm pleased that it's going through the natural process, which is, no matter what the judge decides, we have agreed to this democratic process, and that's what's happening. And for anybody to suggest otherwise is, well, that's, I don't understand that thought process.
So, you bring up a really interesting point, and I really wanted to hit on this, as I was looking at the two different arguments resting. Now, of course, in a court of law, it's a little bit different because everybody is trying to just argue their perspective. But my question is this, like they seized around 90 animals. They found, I was seeing some of them said they had like damaged beaks and they couldn't properly drink. Some of them had other injuries. I don't know. It sounds like it was a terrible place for the animals and they were not well taken care of. It's all. Then the zoo says, actually, we do a great job. There is nothing wrong. Do you think this discrepancy comes from the need to speak in a court of law differently than you would outside of a courtroom? Or do you think that we have here the difference of opinions over the treatment of animals? Do you think that these zoo owners really think that what happened was okay? Or, how do you see that? Because they're just two totally opposing perspectives.
And you see that he said, she said over and over and over. We see it all the time, every single year in all these kind of cases. And I don't necessarily think that unaccredited roadside zoo, they get a deserved bad rep. But there are unaccredited facilities that are USDA licensed that I know of that are good facilities, as long as they're not breeding and they're not allowing physical contact. Then they become, there's a lot of USDA facilities that are accepting animals that have been confiscated by federal or state officials. There are, but they're, the point being is when they take these animals in, their facility has a no breeding, no contact policy, which that means they're part of the solution. this type of facility, Natural Bridge Zoo, they're not part of a solution, right? They're not participating in a species survival plan like, some accredited zoos. They're not helping with conservation, legitimate conservation at all. So, I mean, you can get into the nuts and bolts whether, well, are all these individual accusations about the animal, this particular animal, or the welfare? Go back to the core, which is why are they there in the first place? They're there to make money for the owners or to feed the ego, and it's both. And that's a repetitious situation that you see across the country all the time. And so again, unaccredited doesn't necessarily mean bad, but when you have a facility that is continuing to breed animals and allow public contact, riding elephants or any other type of ambassador animals, they don't serve any part of actual conservation. So I believe that's a problem, right? So then you get into the nuts and bolts, and only the people, I don't have boots on the ground there, so I didn't get to see the animals. And so I'm going to be dependent upon the people that went in there boots on the ground. So now you've got the zoo owner saying that, oh, no, they were only all stressed because you guys raided the place and all the animals were stressed because of that. And then you've got the government saying, I've read some of the specifics. The government sent in, the best of my knowledge, a couple of undercover investigators. One of them was actually some type of animal enforcement officer with the state, had been a previous animal enforcement officer, and then the other person was an undercover individual. So you got to, when a place gets visited, so you go to a place, facility, I often get asked in your advocacy, why don't you go out and visit all these places? Well, I could visit all those places, but I can be more efficient in doing it online and doing research, because if I go there one time, well, if they know I'm coming or they get lucky, I'm only going to see, an hour or two window of when I visited. If I use my research skills online, I can watch them virtually, 24 hours, 7 days a week, and get a lot of content, be much more effective. So it'll be interesting. I would tend to err on the side of, I believe the undercover people that went in, that the situations they reported are, in my professional and personal experience, would be more accurate than somebody that works there or volunteers there saying, oh, we loved them all and we gave them all great food, get great care and medical care and all that. Now, I'm sure there's some gray areas to both sides, but I'm not going to, having worked and volunteered at facilities, I know that, people become, listen, when I worked at the zoo in Tampa, for the first 2 years, it was purple Kool-Aid. It was like a drug. We're working around, 2,000 animals and all these exotic species, and it's a dream of ours, right? And it wasn't until the Kool-Aid started wearing off that we realized, wow, there's a lot of flaws in the system, and we want to be part of the solution. And when that didn't happen, that's when 2 years after that, 4 years in total, we left and became advocates outside the zoo and help get the CEO, have him resign, forcibly resigned, and made some other positive changes within the zoo. But when you work or volunteer at any animal facility, as good as it is or as bad as it is, it's addictive, right? It's that ego. It feeds your ego, and it's pretty darn cool. And so you have to be able to ethically and morally separate that. And that's what we did after our tenure at the zoo, and said, okay, well, this is not what we thought, and we're not ethically, morally comfortable with the way it is, and we're going to go out and do something about that. And so I feel for the people that are there volunteering. You can't demonize everybody. And I'm sure that there's probably some very good people that work and volunteer at the facility. It doesn't mean that they probably started very altruistically and had good intentions. It certainly doesn't look like it ended up that way over the years, based on the USDA inspections and all that. And back to the point of when they say, oh, it's just a wonderful place and there's no problems whatsoever. Listen, just yesterday, I was all over the USDA APHIS website reviewing the inspection reports, and the public can go to the APHIS USDA website, and anybody can review all the inspection reports of every single of the thousands of USDA facilities across the country that are licensed by the USDA. You can review the reports on a multiple year basis, and there's nobody that's perfect, right? AZA accredited zoos, ZAA accredited zoos, roadside zoos. So it's unfathomable to think that somebody can claim that Oh, there's nothing wrong going on here. That's simply not possible. Simply not possible.
Well, and that's, that's the interesting thing is, we always find it to be a very difficult dance. The people that are involved in a lot of the industries that are problematic are people that have good intention. Some people have to find themselves in these situations for financial reasons, but I think I would feel that a lot of the zoo people go in because they love animals. And the problem we've had with the movie so far is it's very difficult to talk to them, because they don't understand that we also made the movie because we love animals, and,
Right.
and we want to find both sides of that. And so I think, in the end, it's like you said, it's best to never demonize the people that are there, and conservation itself, that most people don't understand also, is it's kind of messy. Right? You very often have shady characters working with good characters, working on bad things to help fund good things in conservation. But the one thing that is never negotiable is the welfare, safety, and care for the animals, which is very interesting to see this become the center point of of this particular thing. Because just to watch, I mean, the numbers are amazing, and I want to get into the refrigerators next, because that was a very fascinating piece of the story. First, I just wanted to say hi to Barbara. I see Barbara's here visiting. And hey, Stacy, thank you for joining us today. I see Elizabeth Baker's joining us as well, and Anne Marie. Thank you, Anne Marie, for joining. Maxwell, nice to see you, Maxwell, and Sharon. Hey, Jerry. It's great to see so many people coming in on this conversation. Now, Barbara had an interesting question, and I want to know what your experience is before we move into the refrigerators, which to me is a very fascinating aspect. Barbara says, Asha was removed from the zoo just days before the raid took place. She was moved by transport to an elephant exploitation center called Two Tails Ranch in Florida. I'm not familiar with them personally. Was the zoo tipped off? Asha hasn't been on transport trailer in decades. Did the zoo get their cash cow out of reach because of the raid? In your experience, and obviously we can't definitively speak about this case, do you think, is there a network of grapevine in the zoo world, or how does this work?
Yeah, and Barbara, I'll speak to a couple of Barbara's points, because she brought up about the exploitation that's occurred for decades, right? The elephant rides at the Natural Bridge Zoo. So first, to answer your question, absolutely, there's a nefarious network. I mean, we see it over and over again. When I was still residing in Florida, when we were attempting to shut down Dade City Wild Things, which was one of the most notorious roadside zoos, unaccredited roadside zoos in Florida, not across the country. When they got tipped off, they actually they did ship a bunch of their cats to Joe Exotic, a bunch of their tigers to Joe Exotic, and they shipped them in horrific conditions in transport, just horrific. So yeah, it's a nefarious, dark business, the exotic animal trade. And two, not to miss this point too, is, I mentioned the cash cow. Realize these animals, the zoos like to promote themselves as saying, oh, we don't buy and sell animals, AZA and ZA. They do. In fact, I just published a report last week where one of the AZA accredited zoos sold their surplus giraffe, just barely 2-year-old or just under 2-year-old surplus giraffe, to an unaccredited facility in Texas, right? And called it was surplus because they had no genetic value. So, well, number one, if you're breeding animals that are producing non-relative genetic value, and that's a problem in the first place. And then the AZA is shutting it and selling it to an unaccredited USDA licensed facility in Texas, and they were paid $40,000 for the giraffe. So these are sentient. We treat it like the zoo world's a pretty picture, and it's not. It's a business, right? It's a business based on sentient creatures. So real quickly before I go back, Barbara's other comment about the elephant rights. Listen, I was born in 1960. Before myself or my parents knew better, probably in the early 1960s, I rode the elephant at Lowry Park Zoo. It was called at the time, now it's Zoo Tampa. They had one lone Asian elephant, and she was exploited for rides. And I was probably a 4 or 5-year-old, and I got to ride an elephant. Never did it again, and certainly. But it's 2024, right? And we have these nefarious, unaccredited. I don't know of any accredited zoo right now that has elephant rides. it's all about these roadside zoos that are still exploiting sentient creatures. 2024, you're riding elephants. The circus doesn't even do that, right? So it's just unacceptable practices. And I think what's really exciting for me as an animal advocate is why we are today, again, where we are, is because of public awareness, right? So, I mean, we're having this discussion and there's all this, controversy back and forth that never would have existed maybe even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So it's a wonderful thing. It's a powerful tool for us to be a voice and then unite in that fabric of doing something about it. So I think it's really exciting. The odds of the Natural Bridge Zoo just by chance, within a couple of days shipping their elephant to a nefarious facility, which I am familiar with in Florida, 2 days before the raid, the likelihood of that is like the likelihood of me winning the Mega Millions lottery. It's literally impossible. It's just by chance.
So they got, okay, well that is interesting. That is good to know that the supply and demand chain can be broken within this group as well. I think a lot of times we hear about it and it feels like there's no way to battle it. It seems like it's too big of an issue. But in your experience, I feel like we've seen change be made with the Big Cat Act. We've seen change happen. We've seen legal changes. We've seen legal challenges. And so it feels like there is a very good time. And it's like you said, now is this amazing opportunity to reevaluate. And, it's interesting. I was looking at the Natural Bridge Zoo article, and they had photos of elephant riding, which, like you said, they just don't even do anymore. Even in Thailand, where it's all about elephant tourism, that is no longer allowed. So we're in towards the end of it. Sierra and I were just doing some research last night and found an interesting statistic that the U.S. is one of the countries that's a little bit more resistant to making sustainable changes, right, just for the sake of the animals. But there is still progress and change. So it's great that these people can be brought to court. Now let's talk about that really quick too. If you're at a zoo and you see something that you think is way off, what advice would you give? Do you call the police, or how do you submit a report? Do you go right to the USDA?
Yeah, so there's a number, because it can be, could be a violation. We have very important laws and regulations. The Animal Welfare Act. We've got the Endangered Species Act, and each one's regulated by a different agency. But both and I've used them in this week recently, both the USDA and the Fish and Wildlife Service have online portals. Number one, they've got phone numbers, but even really more interesting, they've got an online submission form that literally takes me 30 seconds to a minute to fill out a complaint or a suspected violation of an animal regulation or law. And I'd encourage everybody out there are the eyes for these sentient creatures that can't speak for themselves. And it's real easy to go online, and in the course of 1 minute, and I'm kidding you not, 1 minute, put in all the pertinent information. You can remain anonymous if you want. They prefer a contact, which I do, but you can report it. And it's when you were talking about how nefarious the webs are, and sadly that's kind of getting worse in the zoological world, because it used to be the AZA. The AZA is a self-touted gold standard of the zoological industry. They tout themselves as that best practices, which I don't agree with. I mean, they're the best of the zoo world, but I don't agree with all the best practices, including ambassador animals putting cheetahs and other exotic cats on leashes for photo ops. But what happened about 3 or 4 years ago is the ZA, which has much lower standards, the Z in a much smaller membership base, and I've been with them, following them since inception, because when I was working at Lowry Park Zoo in Tampa, our CEO allowed the ZA upon inception to use Lowry Park Zoo as their home base, their office, including phone number and all. I mean, people were calling, and I'm like, well, that web though has gotten much worse. What's happening now is started about 3 or 4 years ago. The ZAA is cross-accrediting members from the AZA. So if you go on many of these, probably about a dozen websites now of AZA accredited zoos, they are also cross-accredited by the ZAA. Now that's a genius, although I hate it, a genius move by the ZAA because it makes them look great. I just can't even fathom how the ZAA has allowed and continues to allow that to happen. It's just a big black eye for them. So it's something that I'll be interested in continuing to follow, but it serves no benefit except for that nefarious black market, right? So now that means that AZA zoos can buy, sell, and trade animals amongst ZAA accredited facilities easier. So it just makes it much more difficult for us to track these animals. But again, we go back through the stud books and we can track the animals and we will hold them accountable for what they're doing.
See, and that's incredible that you're able to find, and the accountability I think is such an important aspect. And I know, like watching the conservation game, it was amazing to watch how you guys were able to track them down, and to learn. It's really incredible, to see, and hopefully that won't have to happen one day because we can put an end to this breeding. I mean, it seems to me that, and I don't know how everybody else feels about this, but it seems that if we want to shut it down, one of the only ways may be because people cannot regulate themselves in a way that really is true self-regulation. Well, that removing the breeding may be our only option.
Yeah, and so that's it's curious. Everybody wants to point fingers. All I want, I don't need anybody convicted. I don't need anybody put in prison. I just want you to stop your nefarious activities, right? I want you to stop breeding for profit. I want you to stop pay to play with all these, and this is exotic species from reptiles all the way up to small primates. It's not just cats, right? I want you to stop that. And if you'll and I don't need you to even publicly admit it, just stop the practice. But, riding elephants, using bull hooks on elephants in 2024 is completely unacceptable. But so too is, breeding gorillas to spend their entire life in captivities, right? So it's just unacceptable. At some point in time, now I can say, we need to hold the AZA, the heads of the AZA accountable, and the ZAA, and any individual that owns these USDA accredited or these USDA licensed facilities. But at some point in time, right, there's lots of blame to go around, but at some point in time, the public has to accept responsibility. In 2024, you can't be going to a Myrtle Beach safari or to Zoological Wildlife Foundation in Miami or any roadside zoo and engaging in pay-to-play hands-on encounters with exotic animals and say, I didn't know better. It's unacceptable. So there's a lot of blame to go around. Part of it is the public themselves, most of it with the people that are facilitating these practices. But there's this public awareness is a great tool, and we'll hold them accountable.
And and that's exactly it, right? Educated consumers, because people didn't know, and for a long time the zoo were the only people having the conversation, which was everything is okay. And so now it really is. It is. I think it's a great point that you make. Now we're in the era where we can keep educating people and let them make their own decision. We often excuse the market demand that creates a lot of the problems, whether it's poaching, illegal animal trade, pet trade, even these zoos. All these things come from a market. People don't hope that it sells. They know it will sell, and they exploit on that intention.
It's the ego, right? I was calling out another unaccredited roadside zoo out in California this week. And boy, did I get one of the biggest firestorms back against me I've had in 15 years. But they believe in ambassador animals, and they believe in leashing, all the small cats, taking them out for birthday parties and for schools and for, conservation. And generally they keep it smaller. They do a cheetah walk on site, a leash cheetah in a walk, but they take servals and other small cats out on leashes. And so they posted a tirade. They've never called me out publicly, right, in years, but they did, and it was a pretty pointed post. So I composed a really respectful post back, and it came down to they believe that putting exotic animals on leashes is part of education, that it's okay. So it's going to be it's a challenge to change the human ego. I said, well, what they didn't debate was, you posted a picture of our animal, one of our animal caretaker employees that had recently acquired a juvenile mountain lion, and they brought it to the facility. Well, when they brought it back to the facility, right, she's driving in her vehicle with the mountain lion cub on her lap, right, while she's driving, and it's looking out the window and all. Well, first of all, that's not a responsible way to transport an exotic animal. You're doing it for show. Two, what I called them out for is the Big Cat Public Safety Act requires that if one of the protected species of cat is not in its permanent enclosure, the public has to always remain 15 feet back from that temporary enclosure. So if it's a transport cage, if they got the cat off site, the public has to stay back at all times. So they put this juvenile mountain lion, I caught through public, social media content. They put this mountain lion cub in like a dog, just a little dog crate area in their gift shop, right? So through pictures, I could tell you that the public is not 15 feet back from that. So that's why I was calling, and I submitted a complaint to FWS, and they're, oh, you're just wasting time. We haven't violated when that cat was riding in the vehicle, that's our employee, so that's okay, and it's allowed for. I'm like, well, you didn't respond to the fact that I said that you put the cat on display in your gift shop and let the public go around and take pictures of it within. So it's that philosophical. It's going to be continue to be a very difficult challenge to change human ego. But as I've always said, as you saw in the film, challenge accepted.
I still love that. I love that quote. Real fast, I wanted to show everybody really quick. You just mentioned a bull hook earlier, and I wanted to show everybody this is a bull hook that they use for elephants, and this was allowed within the AZA and within the zoo world, I believe, until very recently, where they finally banned the use of bull hooks, and these are used to jab into the elephants to get their attention. So I wanted everybody to get a sense of, we keep coming back to this. I want to say there's this gap between what we consider kindness and what they consider kindness, between levels of cruelty and the acceptability of cruelty. 100 years ago, cruelty was seen in a very different light. So we are seeing this again where we what's unacceptable to us seems to be acceptable to other people, which is, I really think, why what you said about the he said, she said problem makes sense. We're never going to get anywhere trying to determine the culpability when the entire thing is a problem. The concept is a problem. We need to rethink our concept of how we relate to our world around us and how we treat our world around us. Stopping this, that, or the other is going to help animals individually, but for the future, until we stop thinking of captivity as conservation and realizing that captivity is not conservation, we're going to have this problem pop up like whack-a-mole.
Yeah, so I again, captive conservation is not the answer. I'll freely admit that, while I don't support zoos, I believe that AZA accredited zoos have incredible people that work for those organizations, the animal caretakers especially, having been friends with many of them. But it's the bigger picture. It's a business based on animals, and if the general consensus is the zoological world, they tout how many hundreds of millions of dollars they spend on conservation, air quotes. There's been no unbiased large-scale study done, but the general consensus is by some respected international animal welfare groups is that the consensus is, as a collective, they probably donate between 2 and 5% of their general revenue per year toward actual conservation initiatives, right? So that's the problem I have, is of zoos selling the public on, hey, if you come buy a ticket and you buy this plushie and you eat this and you feed the giraffe, they make the public believe that that's really going to help save giraffes in the wild, or polar bears in the wild, or all these sentient species in the wild. And that's just nonsense, because they aren't donating a significant amount of their revenue toward the actual conservation in that species' native land. So that's again, back to transparency. Forget this the blaming back and forth. They'll get us nowhere. We just need to work toward transparency, empowering people with information, allowing people to make, it's not a right or a wrong decision, right? it's the best decision. So if you listen to you and I today in the podcast and you say, oh, I still love zoos, well, then you're not my audience because you've made your ethical and moral decision, right? I want to reach out to the bigger part of the general population that's making decisions based on a lack of information. Those are the people we need to get to, because then they'll be empowered to make the best decision for them, not a right or a wrong, just the best decision and the best decision for the animals.
Absolutely. And that I think that is so important, because young generations will come up, and the first thing that everyone is like, well, you're going to take your kid to the zoo. It's a very compelling question. There's field trips, there are all kinds of things. So every parent will run into this question. And I don't think it used to be a moral or ethical question people asked themselves maybe 20 years ago, but luckily it is today.
Yeah. And so going to you're right, generationally, we were brought up, that's the only place you went was to a zoo, whether it be accredited or roadside. Today, people have choices, right? They're empowered with knowledge. So, when I have people approach me and say, well, what do you tell your children? What do you tell a family that wants their kids to learn about animals? I say, well, take them to an accredited sanctuary, right? That's my first choice, an accredited, a GFES accredited, or another accredited sanctuary. Or two, if you got to take them to a zoo, all the zoos offer behind the scenes tours. And having worked there, we called it the other side of the zoo. It's very empowering. I encourage people to, if you haven't been to a zoo or haven't been to a particular zoo, go there, but take the behind the scenes tour, pay a little extra money. They all offer the behind the scenes tours. And then you'll be more empowered about how the animals actually live. They don't stay out in the lush exhibits, 24/7. Most of the animals are shipped into, our horrible night houses overnight, steel and concrete jungles. That's the only way a zoo can function, which is during the night, they're locked up in concrete and metal night houses. And when the caretakers come in at 6 a.m, they're out cleaning the public yards, the beautiful, with the waterfalls and all that. And then when the zoo opens at 9:30, they shift all of their animals out to the public side. They close that gate, and those animals are locked out for the day, while the animal caretakers then spend the day cleaning the inside night houses, food prep, and the other things that are necessary. And then at the end of the day, they shift them back in. That's how most zoo animals live their lives, which is a horrible way. I mean, it's a caged, captive life. It's terrible.
It's like cage to cage, huh? I think people don't realize that night houses, that's such an important aspect for the education of the public, is to really think about that. We're sold this idea that these animals live in these beautiful, lush areas. We find out later they actually live in the night houses. A lot of the lush greenery has hot wires or active electric wiring, so that if they touch it, it's recoiled. We were shocked to learn that gorillas mostly like to be in the trees. I always thought gorillas were just on the ground, because I had only seen them in the zoos. So not only is it like a complete miseducation, but imagine how cruel and how weird it would be if you grew up in a room that, it seemed like where you were supposed to be, but every time you touched it, you were shocked. That level of cruelty that the gorillas go through on a day-to-day basis, knowing they're sentient, knowing the giraffes have to go through that, they can't eat all the leaves, that there are hot wires out there, knowing that there are these hidden control aspects being used, really was shocking to me, and that's the other level, is like, we all of us are animal advocates, but still the level of what these zoos do is always shocking. Which brings me to the freezers. Sure. So this particular case, there was a lot of information about dead animals in the freezers. So, okay, in your experience, like, when I think of a walk-in freezer, I used to work in a restaurant, so I think of, all the food storage in there. What are the freezers used for? Is it very commonplace where they would have a freezer of bodies?
So I can only speak from my personal experience at the zoo I work for. We did have a freezer, and the animals, though, would only be kept if an animal passed away. The animal would only be kept temporarily in the freezer until they could the staff veterinarian could perform a necropsy. Right? That was it. And then the animals were disposed of ethically. It wasn't like we sold body parts or used body parts or put them on display or, all these other excuses. I mean, it would be unusual to keep a lot of I mean, unless you don't have adequate veterinary care where they're not performing necropsies in a timely manner. I can't imagine any zoological situation where you have a big freezer full of dead animals. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, when you read that part, like what
Listen. I mean, in part of my zoological tenure was in security, so I would make rounds overnight, and our rounds included the commissary where the food prep took place and the medical procedures took place. And it's a powerful smell that I can tell you today has never gone away, and it's been 23 years because the smell of deceased animals permeates the building, right? So you can put them in a freezer, but there's still that pungent smell, the smell of death. And I, to this day, will never forget that smell, having to experience it. But again, we did not keep a stock of dead animal carcasses in our freezer for any other reason, just for the purpose of a necropsy. So I just, I read that in the news reports, it's like, and their excuses or their explanations for that did make sense to me.
That's yeah, I just, the more I read about it, I was just like, this is, it seems so odd. It seems like another aspect of neglect that maybe would be acceptable within those realms, or maybe they felt that they weren't.
Well, again, they're transparency, right? Accountability. If there's nobody holding them accountable for practices that they've done forever, then why would you expect to find otherwise, right? Unless somebody's going in and thoroughly and looking at those aspects of the zoological, AZA accredited zoos get inspected every 5 years, right? I can tell you what happened with ours, because I was there through one of the inspection processes, is that it's hurry up and fix it, right? They wait till year 4.5, and then it's hurry up and fix everything, because they know it's a known inspection that's coming up with a full team of AZA representatives. So that's not the way, every place, it's kind of like kicking the can down the road. You aren't going to dedicate your resources towards making everything as perfect as possible unless you're forced to, right? Well, if you're only forced to every 5 years, knowing, hey, nobody's gonna come out and complain because nobody's gonna expect to inspect us except every 5 years, then you're gonna be a little more lax on how diligent you are with regard to maintenance, animal welfare, and human safety.
That definitely puts it in a better perspective, I think, for people that are outside of the zoo world, and we have to remember too, as animal advocates, even though we have problems with the zoo, it is run by people, and we have to find ways that we can maybe address the problems, in a fashion. So I think an important aspect is always understanding, and in order to do that, we have to keep in mind the zoo's perspectives and their challenges in what they want to do, because until we shut them down, we're probably always going to have a push-pull of what's good for business, what's good for the animals, as we see. And as Susan Roberts says, wildlife animals are not for human entertainment. And I think it goes back just really to what you said, Jeff. It just says it all right away. Like, this captivity, this is not conservation, and conservation is not in captivity. The two concepts need to be removed from each other, although they were melded together maybe about 80, 90 years ago. So we definitely have, like you said, an ego and society sort of challenge in finding a better future for all the animals.
One of the other false narratives of the zoological world is that, they kind of make the public imagine that all the animals we have are endangered, right? That this is a special collection of animals. And the reality is that probably, the general number is, percentage-wise, maybe 5% of a zoo census of animals is going to be on the SSP, the Species Survival Plan list. The rest are just, I shouldn't say just, they're sentient creatures, but the purpose of them being there is just so they can say, we have the most animals, or the most diversity of animals, to get you to come in through the gate to see the most number of animals. They aren't contributing genetically to a species survival plan. It's simply a collection of animals.
Just for tickets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's good to point out, like you said, tickets. I encourage the public to go. All the zoos have to publish their 990s, the IRS 990s. Go on the IRS 990s. You can Google it, and many of the zoos will put them, buried on their website, but they'll bury it in the financial area. Look at the numbers. I mean, like some of the bigger zoos, they have assets of over 110, 120, 130 million dollars assets, right? And you look where the money goes. Look how the pie chart breaks down. Look at the salaries, look at the benefits, look at marketing, look at all these things, and then look at the animal caretaking side. They usually get the smallest slice of the pie, right? I encourage people, empower yourself with knowledge. These 990s are public information, and you will be surprised at, look at some of these zoo CEOs that are making, 150, 250. Our CEO one time made over $300,000. And then you look at the VP was making, almost $200,000, and the next person down was $120,000. You look at where the money goes, and again, it's a business based on animals.
And that, and it's interesting because when people talk about the zoos, we always hear two different things. When everybody says, well, the zoos are good, the reason that they give is always the same. It's the zookeepers, it's the vets, it's the vet technology.
Right.
These are the three things that people are like, man, zoos are amazing. And when we hear the bad things, the zoos, it is always the safety, the cruelty, and the exploitation of money, or the lack of money. It's just, it's a money-making venture. So it's interesting. I often wonder if the future of zoos is a change in the business model. The only thing, that zoos really have going is like we were talking about, selling tickets. They have all these wonderful aspects, but all the problems come in but selling tickets becomes their liability, their survival, their liability. So maybe there's a way we can take the best parts of the zoo, which is kind of like, I guess, more of like an NGO, vets, caretakers, and people like that. And it would be nice to see them be able to have jobs that help animals in these places without it being this particular business model.
Yeah, the whole part, zoo, listen, give them full credit. The zoos today are nothing like zoos from the 1950s and 60s, right? When I grew up, and they're all just concrete pits and the animals are in them. So zoos are evolving in a positive direction, albeit a slow pace. But the really cool thing, again, is empowering, is that we as the public have the power now through social media to help raise the speed of that evolution. And it's our responsibility. I mean, I believe it's our ethical and moral responsibility to help affect positive change within the zoological institutions. And we're going to do that through education, public awareness, exactly like this podcast today. It's where, it's empowering. Listen, my wife and I were 41 years old when we were working for the AZA accredited zoo, and we're like, wow, it's our dream world, right? And then we learned the whole nefarious world of people owning exotic animals, from primates to big cats. And we're like, how do we go through college and not know that people with this exotic animal market, and that's because it's about it's guesstimated to be about a $2 billion annual industry in our country, and worldwide 10 billion. And that's everything from reptiles all the way to primates and big cats. Now, if they're estimating 2 billion here, 10 billion worldwide, the realistic number that I hear is 4 billion and 20 billion. And that's every year.
Well,
that's what drives the industry.
And they the only story we hear from them is, we need more money. We need more money. We need to raise more money. And a great example is Cincinnati Zoo just raised a bunch of money to take elephants and expand the elephant care area. And the UK just banned the use of elephants for exploitation purposes. So we have different types of approaches happening, but it is interesting to see that while one country is banning it, saying they're sentient, we need to ban this. Another country is saying, come on over, we'll give them a slightly larger space.
Yeah. And so with regard to elephants, I was at Tampa's Lowry Park Zoo at the time when we the zoo partnered with the San Diego Zoo, and we, in air quotes, rescued 11 elephants from Swaziland, which meant that the two zoos bought 11 elephants and flew them back on a 747. If you get the chance, read the novel, the book, Zoo Story by Thomas French, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. And we had some minor contributions in the book because we were there during that time. I was at the zoo at the back gate heading security when they brought in those 4 elephants from the Tampa International Airport. But the whole idea of elephants in captivity, right? That's a flawed concept, right? If you look at elephant lifespan and how long they're living, they're not sustainable in captivity, right? So that's why they keep having to go overseas and import or steal elephants out of the wild, bring them to zoos, and then they've been massively unsuccessful in getting them to breed. So what they do is it's forced artificial insemination, right? So they'll bring in these. In our case, we brought in these specialists from Germany, and they forcibly impregnate these elephants, and some of them have never been parents. So I was at the zoo, and I can tell you from personal experience, I was at the zoo when they had put our one elephant at the time through that artificial procedure. She was never a mother before, right? So she was totally incapable of knowing what that was going to be like. She hadn't seen it happen in the wild. She hadn't been in a herd that had taught her how to behave like a mother elephant. So in my rounds at night, what the zoo did for a period of time is when she was pregnant and they felt that she was near the end of her gestation, they were afraid that if they left her overnight in the inside elephant night house, that if she gave birth overnight, she might accidentally freak out or stomp on the newborn elephant. That was their fear. So the zoo's solution to that, and I witnessed it, is the zoo chained that elephant, chained her to the ground by one leg, so that in front and one leg and back. So she had the front left leg or back right leg. Chained her for the overnight period, so that if she gave birth, there was less chance of her hurting that newborn calf, right? I watched Ellie, watched her just rock back and forth overnight, rock, like you'd see a circus elephant. Just broke my heart. So this whole flawed concept of captive conservation, in this case, elephant reproduction, it's just not sustainable in captivity. They just keep looking for ways to make it happen. So I'm totally against what they're doing. You can build a big, beautiful yard. That's great. How's that helping elephants in the wild? Take that 10 million, you see it all the time in zoos, right? Every year we build a 5 or a 10 or a $15 million new enclosure for, okay, great, 6 primates or 3 elephants. I'm all for improving their well-being in that zoological captive environment that you force them to be in. But why not say, instead of that $10 million, let's build a $5 million really nice enclosure, and let's donate $5 million to buy habitat in the wild, to pay for the rangers to protect that habitat and solve the problem in the wild. That's the answer, right? It's not about building a pretty elephant enclosure. Kudos to anybody that thinks, it is improving those few sentient creatures' lives. It's not solving the problem, right? So how about you cut some of those millions of dollars, improve the quality of life for the sentient creatures that they've put in captive conservation, and then taking the rest of that money and really putting it towards solving the problem in the wild. You're not going to have elephants in captivity unless you keep stealing them from the wild. That's not the solution.
Absolutely. And somebody earlier asked, well, what benefits do animals get in zoos that they don't get in the wild? Obviously, there's not too many. But one thing I want to bring up is that elephants, the same as gorillas, are very important keystone species that are seed dispersal agents. So when you have an elephant or a gorilla in a zoo, they're not doing their job and they're not out moving seeds around, creating more trees for the future to help us sequester more and more carbon to help the world climate stabilize. So very often the way, at least that we see it now, especially after working on Harambe, is every gorilla and every elephant and every seed dispersal agent in captivity is actually a nail in the coffin of the earth and its survival in the future. So, I think there needs to be a little bit of a flip too, where we also need to think about, well, what is nature? The animals need nature, but we also have to remember that nature needs the animals. And we are killing ourselves by removing them from their own environment.
The number one threat to all sentient species on planet Earth, number one threat is the same: lack of habitat, right? For human beings, for animals. So this false narrative that captive conservation, the zoos of the future, are their only chance, is just a completely false narrative. The chance for these species in the wild, the sustainability of all species, including human beings, is protecting habitat. Start there and then build from that. And you see some positive things happening in zoos, where species survival plans generally used to be, there's one big set of plans for the United States, one for the European, and one all different, and they weren't working together. They are starting to work more collaboratively for species survival. Again, that's not addressing the animals in the wild, right? It's just for captive animals. So we have to get off that narrative that a captive animal is the future for sentient beings. It's not.
I was going to ask what your final thoughts were, but I think that wraps it up beautifully.
Yeah, what I'd like to say, everybody needs to go away with a positive message. Listen, I'm a lone wolf, right? So people often ask me, I'm so overwhelmed. The animals need us so much, and there's so many animals, and what do? I feel helpless. Don't you feel helpless? Well, of course I feel helpless, but the only way we lose this battle is by not doing anything. Apathy, right? Apathy is the only way we will lose this battle. So everybody has a voice, and you can do exactly what I'm doing, exactly what Eric and Sierra are doing, and their team, is be the voice. Report things that don't look right to you. Contact, journalists that want to write a story about it. I've recently done that just out of the blue in Florida, and it's turned into a wonderful series of articles. You have the voice. Write a letter to the editor. You have the voice. You are the voice for these sentient creatures, and it's just an amazing. And I guarantee you do it, you're gonna feel like $1 million, and you are part of the change. We are part of the change. Apathy kills, and advocacy wins.
I love that. That now goes on my list of quotes, along with challenges. Yeah, because that's the thing. I love that about you. That no matter how it feels, you're going to keep coming out. You're going to keep fighting for the animals. In the end, every day when you look at the mirror, you have to be happy with what you did and the impact you had on the world. And there is nothing better than helping fight for the defense.
And a big shout out to you and Sierra and your team, man. You guys inspired me because we connected kind of out of the blue, and the more we get to know each other, it's like brothers, right? Brothers and sisters. Yes. And you Absolutely. Guys inspire me because when I watched your just profoundly life-changing documentary Harambe, I went into it expecting like, well, this is just a movie about a tragedy, and I'm prepared for that. And I as I shared with you, I was a little confused after the first time I watched it, because I'm like, wow, this is like huge, like, right? We've just spread out and addressed so many different subjects, captive conservation in the zoological world. We've talked about gorilla conservation. We've talked about, of course, Harambe, this sentient creature that needs to be remembered forever. It's like it was so much bigger than I had imagined. So you guys inspire me, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future as well.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And that everybody that's watching, just know that we've got some plans in the background here, and we're going to be coming out with an amazing project next year. We're going to be working on a new project to keep pushing these stories, to keep pushing these concepts, and to keep challenging what was, in the hopes of changing what is and what will be. So, Jeff, thank you for joining us again today. Really, really appreciate it. Your input, your insight, and I think your perspective on this topic has really been beautiful and enlightening. Thank you for joining us.
It's a privilege and a pleasure, Eric, and I can't wait to work on the future projects. And let's bring that voice louder. And again, as I've always said, that we arguably collectively we surely will not be denied or defeated in being the voice for our sentient animal friends that can't speak for themselves. We will not be defeated.
Absolutely. Love it. Yes. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Everybody, take those words today, take that inspiration, take that feeling, and know, just like Jeff taught us, you can be the change. You can make the difference. You can be the voice, be the eyes, call the USDA, report what you see is wrong, speak out when you see what is wrong. You would do it when you saw a dog in a car in the middle of the heat and the windows are rolled up. There's even laws about that. People understand cruelty, people know, and we have to remember it's all within our power. One person can change the world. And all of us here together as one voice, it is absolutely, there's no way. There's no way they can't hear us, and there's no way we can't make a change. So, all right. Well, thank you again. It was an amazing discussion. This has been a crazy case. Norma had asked, well, what's going to happen next with the case? We're going to all be watching hopefully next week or relatively soon. We should see what happens. And it'll be a very important case to understand how zoos can work or can need to be more transparent in the future. So let's hope for the best outcome for the animals.
Be well, my friend.
All right. Take care, Jeff. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm glad everybody came back to join us this week. We're going to be continuing to do lives, talk about issues that are happening today in captivity and conservation. What do we take away from this? We take away the one thing that Jeff has said over and over that I think is one of the most important things we can learn and we should remember today, moving forward into the future. Tell your friends, captivity is not conservation. We've got to do better by the animals. Thank you, everybody. I know all your hearts, spirits, and love is out there. Let's go change the world.